On this episode of Through the Pines, we'll cover Family Money Talks with the Hartford's John Diehl and Matt Montague. Welcome to a financial planning podcast with a down-to-earth vibe. Sasquatch listens while doing Pilates for ski season. This is Through the Pines. Our advisors for this episode, we do welcome back Rex.m.baxter and Brandyn Smith from planwithbaxter.com. They are the 2023 and 2024 and 2025 Forbes Best in State Wealth Management Teams for Utah, the advisor hub, fastest growing advisors to watch under $1 billion, and also the receivers of the Ameriprise Client Experience Award, which means they know what they're talking about. Welcome to the program, Rex and Brandyn.
Hey, thanks for having us again.
Yes, and then also we have guests in studio, which I love this. I love to have guests. So we have the Hartford's John Diehl, 30 plus years in the industry, and Matt Montague from BYU. That's all you need to know. Also from the Hartford. So today we will talk about money talks. And I don't know, I know on the surface what that could entail, John, but walk us through it. What is the definition? What are we getting ourselves into here today?
Sure. So family money talks are different than family estate plans because, look, for the 30 years I've been in the industry, we've talked about this generational transfer of wealth that's going to happen between families. And we know all the methods to make that transfer happen, but we never talk about when the wisdom transfers. So we can transfer wealth, but if we don't transfer the wisdom with it, there are negative connotations that come with that. And so what we're hoping to do with this topic is inspire families to talk not only about the money, but about the feelings and about the values that money represents within families. That's why we call them family money talks.
Money chats, and they should be around a campfire, Rex.
Sure feels like families avoid both of those discussions an awful lot. People don't want to talk about their estate plan. They don't want to let their kids know how the money's going to transfer, and they don't really like talking about money. They feel it's awkward when they talk about it.
Yeah, and actually our research shows there's a couple other reasons. One, we think that our children will feel entitled, right? That somehow they'll become lazy if they know what they may be coming into. The other thing is that we just fear that it will kind of interfere with the relationship. It'll change our relationship. And by the way, it goes the other way as well. Kids don't want to ask parents because they don't want to appear pushy or, that they're delving into something that they shouldn't. So as a result, many families never talk about these topics until we're sitting in the attorney's office and the attorney's saying, you get this, you get that, but we have no idea where the money came from or what the relationship with money is.
Yeah, let's break through some barriers.
Yeah, interesting. What are some of those statistics that I see one here about affluent Americans don't talk to their children about wealth?
They really don't. And the downside, probably the biggest statistic that kind of stunned me, we all know the old adage that first generation makes it, second generation maintains it, third generation loses it. Well, actually, the statistics tell a slightly different story in that first generation makes it, 70% of the second generation will actually lose it, and 90% of the third generation will lose it because we're just not telling the stories around the importance in relationships with money. So we never talk about it, and the wealth becomes squandered over time. So in an effort to kind of push back against that, that's why we think it's so important to break this money silence, if you will.
Yeah, I think, something that Brandyn and I have witnessed a lot is that typically when somebody inherits money, the average person has it fully spent down within 18 months, regardless of the dollar amount of the money. It could be, $100,000, it could be $5 million. And it's almost always spent within that first 18 months of somebody getting it. And I think it's because of this.
And I think I'd point out that when they spend it, it's always with usually with good intention, right? I'm going to pay this debt down. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go, and it's always either rationalized or with good intention. And I think if parents would have had more of a conversation with them, maybe they could have said, hey, okay, that's good, but maybe there's something better.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the risks of avoiding the money talks. In other words, you mentioned how much people lose, but we had someone famous recently make the news, Aretha Franklin.
Yeah, so Aretha Franklin is just one example, and you can find dozens of examples of celebrities that never talked with the next generation about how the money would be spent, how it would be transferred, what it meant to the person. So in the case of Aretha Franklin, she had a substantial estate when she passed away, but that estate got wrangled up into court proceedings because the siblings didn't agree on what the settlements would be. And the eventual estate that was distributed was just a fraction of its normal value. Now, that's kind of an extreme case. And look, we can point to other celebrities. But the fact of the matter is, many of us know families in our community. I'm sure you guys have dealt with families where, because of a family money talk never occurred, you have siblings that disagree. And actually, the thought of a parent in conveying this wealth, which is meant to be a blessing on the family, actually being the thing that divides and splinters the family is heartbreaking, right? So an estate that isn't properly communicated, where we all are sitting around and find out, as I said, in the attorney's office, is not the smoothest way to effect that transfer. We're transferring the money, but the wisdom isn't following. Yeah. And that's really what we're trying to inspire, is that money is, I don't want to call it a symptom. Money is a byproduct of a life well lived, right? Wealth. And being able to tell the stories around where the wealth came from, what it's to be used for, what our attitudes were, but not only our attitudes of those who generated the wealth, but we should be interested in what the attitudes are of the next generation that is going to come into that wealth as well. We may not always agree, but at least we should try to understand where we're coming from.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, maybe we'll get into here in just a little bit on how to even start those conversations and when to have them. But you did mention there are 3 types of intelligence for financial well-being. Let's go through some of those.
So sure. The first type of intelligence we talk about is financial intelligence. And I'm going to ask for the help of all of you guys in kind of thinking about this. What's financial intelligence? Financial intelligence really deals with financial topics themselves. So the way we encourage families to think about this is we want you to think about a story, about a lesson that you've learned when it comes to money. Maybe it's a funny story. Maybe it's something you did wrong that shows your vulnerability, but somehow you learned a lesson, whether it was passed to you, whether it was an experiential story, so on and so forth. Thinking about that with the purpose in mind of telling the next generation about what happened. So I'll give you an example. I'll start, and then you guys can think of some of your own. When we went through the financial crisis, 2009, 10, 11, the Great Recession, it was during a time my children were fairly young. I have 3 kids. My wife and I were saving for college at that time through 529 plans. And I can remember in 2010, it came time to write the check to fund our 529 plans, and my hand was literally shaking when I signed the check. Because if we remember the Great Recession, remember that? I'll take us back. We didn't know if we were going to have a car company that wasn't nationalized. We didn't know if we would have a bank that wasn't nationalized. And I didn't know if I was going to have a job in 2 months, let alone be able to fund a child's education. But I signed the check and sent it in anyway. 5 years later, I wish I had written 10 of those checks. And it taught me an important lesson about investment discipline, right? Investing is a discipline, and we need to kind of establish a plan and try to stick with it as much as we can. We were phenomenally rewarded for investing during that time, which was nobody wanted to invest at that time. You thought, my gosh, who knows what was going to happen? But it was an important lesson for me. And I, in turn, got to share that story with my kids who benefited from that saving discipline that my wife and I executed as we were saving for their college educations. They're all out of college now, off the family payroll. We're very proud of them. But this was a necessary part. So that's part of that financial intelligence that I would share with my family. How about you guys? Any stories that pop into your minds?
I'll share one.
I know you didn't write the check for the 529, Rex.
I don't. I don't pay for college. I don't pay for college for my kids. And so I make them work and stress and fight through it, which is probably a story in and of itself. But, when I was in college, which is, many moons ago now, but I was going into finance and things like that. And I thought, okay, since I'm going into finance and going into investing, I'm going to research a company. And so I researched, looked at a bunch of different companies, and I was like, I want something really aggressive, small. I've got lots of time. And so I found this small little company and put $1,000 in it, which for me was a lot at the time because I was trying to graduate debt free and I was having to pay for it myself and work through it. And so it was this casino in Vegas that I was buying the stock of the casino, and it turned into the Stratosphere, what is now known as the Stratosphere, which has gone bankrupt, I think, 3 times before where it's at today. And so the lesson to me was it doesn't matter how good your research is sometimes it's just not going to work out. And so if it's critical money to you, right, you should diversify it, and there's times to take risk. And one of the things we frequently say on this podcast is that concentration, and at that point, $1,000 was concentration to me, right? And so concentration can be the number one builder of wealth or the number one destroyer of wealth, depending upon what happens in your business or your real estate or your individual holding. And so that's something that I've continued to pass on to the kids to make sure that they understand concentration and when it's good and when it's a concern.
Yeah, good answer. Matt?
Oh, sure. I'll chime in here. It's interesting, just born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, and thinking of this idea of family money stories and raising children today, of just how observant when things aren't expressed or said. So kind of the idea of communication, and whether the lack of or the good side of the communication. And in our home growing up, and loved my parents to death, and they're just the greatest parents, money was not ever talked about. That said, as a child, you could feel where you were at financially, of just observing what was going on around you. So I look back and I think thinking of the lack of communication, but just being able to observe what was going on around. So here we are in this trailer that was from 1960, you said.
Yep.
I just remember in our home, we never really had a car in the same decade we were living in. So thinking of, kind of growing up in the 90s, we never had a car in the 90s. It was 80s or maybe even in the 70s. I can remember going, plus with 3 older sisters and being the youngest and spending time at TJ Maxx.
Yeah.
And I was the one that held the purses. They were trying on clothes and then standing in the layaway line to kind of, couldn't buy the clothes outright, stand in the layaway line. So, again, kind of that feel or that vibe, and to think of that transformation of wisdom that John's talked about. It wasn't expressed or said, but again, just kind of getting a vibe or a feel of what was going on in our home. Mom was the breadwinner as a kindergarten teacher. Dad just kind of bounced around doing some things. So the money there wasn't a whole lot to talk about. But again, just the importance of, I would say, looking back, and then with our children moving forward, just want to do a better job of proactively having the conversations as a family, and just that idea of communication and information kind of leading to decisions down the road, for our family today.
Yeah. No, that's great. Brandyn?
Yeah, I think with our kids, I try to be very transparent with our kids. And it's funny because that comes with caveats to them. Like, okay, guys, I don't know why, but we can't talk about this with anybody else around outside of our family, but here's where we're at, right? And here's what we're making, and here's what we're trying to save for. And we'll go on like a little trip or something, and I'll say, this is how much that costs. This is how much this camping trip costs. This is how much this Universal Studios trip costs, right? Like, and I'll tell them the numbers and say, what do you guys think about that? Like, do we want to do another one of those, or would we prefer to save? And we can talk about those things. And I guess my goal for them is to give them exposure to like, hey, like this is what money is. This is what it can do. And here's where we're at and what we're trying to go, and let them kind of be involved in the family goals. Of course, I kind of guide some of that, like this is what I want to do, and what me and mom want to do probably takes a little bit of preference, but what do you guys think? And I think giving them a little bit of, easy practice to think about those things can be really beneficial.
I agree. And the more you do that with them as they age, the better it works, because they have different concepts of money from age 5 to 17, and so doing this, like you said, once a year or throughout the year as they age, and then they kind of think, these pants cost that much, and maybe we wait on that to get to do something else. So, John, I was going to tell you, I have a same grandpa we were mentioning before the podcast. Actually, he had a sister who married John B. Lansing, and John B. Lansing was the inventor of JBL speakers, which I buy here in the studio just because I think it's a cool story. And when he passed in California, state of California, he had nothing written down. They didn't talk about it, and then none of the family got anything, right? And it was just recently that the company now has been sold so many times that, because at least the family could have toured JBL facilities for a while, but then now like there's no connection or anything left anymore. So it can leave the whole family.
Yeah. So really that financial intelligence, it's really the start, or maybe one of the easy steps talking about a family money talk, is just sharing. And I loved, Rex, what you said, because being able to show a vulnerability of something I screwed up and I learned from is important to talk to your family members about.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the common misconceptions about this, not seeing eye to eye?
Oh, yeah. So, the purpose of a family money talk is that it shouldn't be, hey, I'm the one that generated the wealth, so this is a lecture session, right? I'm going to tell you. I am going to tell you after I'm gone. I'm going to tell you exactly how you're going to use the money, because we know that isn't going to. What it is, it's supposed to be a forum in which they can understand how my wife and I feel about money and our relationship with the money, and some of these stories about our emotions behind it, about how it represents some of the values in our family. But we also have to listen for their views, because their views and their experiences with money. Matt just shared from his family story what his perceptions were as a child versus maybe where his parents were coming from. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes those perceptions, I had a recent conversation with my mom. My mom was a single mom. We had a kind of a financially stringent upbringing. And I remember she was working 3 part-time jobs. My dad left when my brothers and I was 5 years old. My brothers were 10. And she went somewhere to try to apply for assistance of some type. And she got turned down because she was making too much money at her 3 part-time jobs.
Interesting.
And I remember seeing my mother in tears. I'm probably 7, 8, 9 years old at the time. Deeply impacted me. And it kind of became a thing like, hey, when I have a family, one of the things I'm going to do is provide. Like, if nothing else, I'm going to provide. By the way, there was some downside to that, because you become singularly focused on that, and that can be a problem as well. But it's interesting today, when I talk to my mom about that experience, she doesn't even remember it. So something that impacted me deeply, she doesn't even recall any longer. That's why it's important when we have these. It's not about coming to agreement. Right? A lot of people think, we've got to get on the same page. You may not be on the same page, but at least you'll have a better understanding of where everybody's coming from.
Brandyn, I'm not exactly sure your background, but from what I have just learned, 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe 5 of us in this trailer who are on a financial planning podcast did not come from money.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's just an interesting observation, right?
But you talked about that before too. It's like you do the opposite of what you see at home sometimes.
Yeah, I remember, my parents, when I was growing up and young, my dad had 3 jobs. He was a school counselor during the school year, and then he would paint during the summers, and he would teach driver's ed, whenever he could. And so he'd always have 3 jobs. And I remember looking at kind of the budget back when I was a child, and the budget was maybe $250 a month for a family of 6. And so mom's always making the clothes. We're always, working on the garden, because that's how we're literally going to feed ourselves. And we would hunt and fish and things like that, because that's where our protein, our meat would come from. And so it's interesting as we look at our childhoods and our upbringing, the biases that we all carry with us.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to share not only what we've learned from those upbringings, but the alternative of these are our biases, and I may be overcorrecting in these opinions because of those biases. And so you, as my child, you need to recognize that, and you need to have a broader view other than what I'm just saying, so that you're making up your own decision as to what is going to happen because our kids so frequently, we can say something in a gazillion different ways. And when you do that, you're going to coach and guide them, and you can almost steer them the path you want without them recognizing that you're steering them down the path that you want. And later on in life, they'll see that. And you don't want that. You want that to truly be their decision if you can. Yeah. If you can take them down those conversation paths.
So it's interesting. We talked about financial intelligence. There's another type of intelligence called emotional intelligence. So if you were to complete the sentence, when I spend money, I feel. When I borrow money, I feel. When I invest money, I feel. The first time I went through this with the wealth psychologist, her name's Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, who helped us develop these concepts. I remember saying to her, when I borrow money, I feel worried. Right? Like debt to me, given my family background, debt was crushing. And just, it's my bias, as you say, Rex, like I don't want any debt. Now you can say that's a good thing, but as a financial planner, right, as a CFP, I know there's good uses of debt, but I'm very hesitant, right? And that can limit me. So as you said, to say to your kids, look, this is how I am. I know mortgage debt is one of the best debts you're going to have if you're going to have it, but like it bothered me so much to have it. We like really worked hard to pay it down where maybe we neglected other areas that we could have. So again, the biases are very important, but being able to complete those sentences. When I spend money, I feel. When I invest money, I feel. When I borrow money, I feel. That clues you into your emotional connection with money and the things that drive your behaviors.
Those are great questions. And so we need to wrap those into more of our conversations, probably with clients. So,
Rex is learning today.
Yeah, this is great. This is awesome.
Well, I think, too, it's interesting when folks are working with a financial advisor, working with Rex and Brandyn, and this idea of retirement or how you view that is the couple or the individual is going to do that once. They have one shot at it. And this idea around this financial intelligence, the emotional intelligence is, one of the most, I would say, underappreciated advantages of working with the financial advisors. They have the opportunity to witness and see and learn from hundreds, if not thousands, of folks that go through this process. So to be able to pull from, a couple that, goes through retirement at age 60 or someone that does really, really well financially in younger retirement, having the resources, having the stories, kind of view a financial advisor as a curator of stories that they're learning from others and to be able to relate and pull examples from others, whether it is on the financial intelligence side or the emotional intelligence or the third intelligence we'll talk about here probably next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll jump back to that. So the three types of intelligence. So we went over financial, emotional, and then we have family intelligence, John.
Family intelligence is one of my favorite ones. So if you were to draw a family tree on the back of a napkin or on a blank piece of paper, and you were just to think about, let's say, your parents and your grandparents, we ask what qualities, what relationships with, what lessons were you taught by influential people in your life? And they may be verbal lessons like, oh, my grandfather always said, but they could also be things that you observed in their lives. Like, for example, maybe you had a family member who was not a very successful business person, which guided your career path into maybe a more stable corporate type of environment, right? Mm-hmm. But as you think back, and oftentimes we start with things that make us smile, right? So my grandparents were farmers. My grandmother was one of the most frugal people I ever met in my life. There was not a part of an animal that we didn't eat growing up, mm-hmm. right? And she made her own rugs. She actually made my mother's wedding dress for her wedding. But that frugality was passed down to me. So I'm now the guy that when my wife says, John, I think we need a new sofa, and I'll look at it and there's stuffing coming out of one cushion and it's missing a leg. I'm like, oh, let's just get a stack of books and prop it up and get a slip cover. We don't need a new sofa. My wife is a saint. Thank goodness she looks out, because that was something that was passed down to me. Mm-hmm. So when we think about family intelligence, it was, what are the lessons or what are the examples? And by the way, you may identify with those examples and want to absorb them, or you may have rebelled against those behaviors or examples. They're not right or wrong. They're just things that were passed down to us. And then the second part of family intelligence, and it's actually a really fun exercise to walk through with people, is if I were to ask you to identify 3 core values about who you are, right? 3 things that you think, like, look, I'm an adventurer. I love the outdoors. I love my faith. Whatever it might be. You identify 3 core values, and we make a list of values available to help people think through that. But once you identify those 3 values, you think about how then do I honor those values in the way we manage or work with our wealth? So another example, I'll pick on my grandfather for a second. Not many of us can remember what happened to us between ages 6, 7, 8. But I remember every Saturday morning I would show up at my grandparents' house. They lived on a farm not far from us. And we would load his 1972 Chevy Nova with Meals on Wheels. And we would set off on Saturday mornings to deliver these meals. And some of the people that we delivered to, they were pretty broken physically. And when they saw a 6-year-old little boy, the first thing they wanted to do, put the clamps on. Like, for me, it was kind of terrifying, right? And I don't think less of me in that way. But honestly, it was probably 10 years, 12 years later that I realized that the food was the least important thing that those people were receiving that day.
Right.
My grandfather was the one who planted the charitable seed in me to say we use our wealth to help others. We serve others. And so that serving the community, being involved in the community is something that stuck with me and something that my wife and I hope to model for our kids, right? When they're ready to serve in their community. So those 2 parts. One is thinking about the family construct and what you've learned or what you rebelled against. And then secondly, identifying the values that are core to you, but that's not the only thing. Then examine your own behaviors. How does your dealing with wealth reflect and honor those values that you just told me were so important to you?
Yeah, especially because kids are watching.
Oh yeah,
right, and they see how you act and react and things like that. And I love the fact of how you tie in service, because that's so important to me and my family, to where we get our kids involved in service. We just finished a shoe drive for homeless teenagers. With our family. So we went around and gathered a bunch of old shoes from everybody that we could think of. And we came with, half a dozen big old, 4-foot boxes of shoes to bring to them. And I think it's important that your kids see that and see that that's important to you. And I think that charitable inclination and giving back and serving others is so important in society. And I don't want to lose that as a society.
Right.
So
how about you guys? Anything comes to mind in terms of values and how they're reflected in the way you manage wealth?
I would mention, I love that example, and it's John and I have worked together for 20 years, and I love when he comes into town to travel with me, and we know each other's families relatively well, and to hear that background story of just the impact of 6, 7, 8 years old, and being bear hugged by strangers, and to see, we were just chatting yesterday, and one of the things that John and his wife do there in Myrtle Beach area, where's a major retirement community and aging population, is they do their own little Uber service. Folks that need to get to doctor's appointments or things that go grocery shopping or pick up the medications, is they're on a list and they get called, and when he's not traveling, hitting the road, is he and his wife will literally go around the Myrtle Beach area and help. So it's just neat to see that impact of 6 or 7 years old. Here we fast forward, 50 years later, and that seed was planted and it's sprouted, it's grown, and here he is now, kind of this tree producing fruit, sharing that with others in his community, and his children see that as well. Another interesting, I guess, the thought coming to mind, my wife and I were just having this conversation and discussion of, where you can, financially write the check to help out a cause or a situation or organization, but we often talk in our home about, to the children, of how do you spell love? And the kids are always like, Dad, come on. Like, we have an 8-year-old, an 11-year-old, 15, 19, 22-year-old. And we've talked about this for years, but, and we say, you spell love not Love, but Time. And we could sit here as a family and we could say, Thanksgiving, this is a great time. Christmas, the holidays, to be in that giving spirit and mode where you could just write a check and send it off. to a cause, which is a great thing, but trying to teach the idea of time really is how we spell love. When we take a step back and think of where do I spend my time, that's where your I guess the treasure, where your heart is. And so that's, again, I think a timely, here we are with the holidays coming up, something just to think about in regards to these intelligences to be involved, not just with the money, but giving up time.
Yeah, time's all we have, really, in the end. I want to know how to spark these conversations because this is fascinating to me. And to go, like you said, you can't go home and lecture. Hey. All right, guys, I got an idea. Let's do this family meeting. 6 p.m. sharp.
When it's best when it's over the Thanksgiving turkey and mom or dad breaks out. Okay, kids, let's talk about the will. That is not the time.
That's not
right?
okay. That's not the time.
Yeah. Shoot.
All right, we're gonna dive in, but Brandyn, let's get some more numbers first, shall we?
Let's do
This
it.
is where we have fun numbers from the industry while roasting s'mores.
All right. So this is an interesting one, Brandyn. So you'll like it. You like the interesting one. Yeah. And this is according to Bloomberg, but for the first time ever, Morningstar calculated that there are more publicly traded ETFs than individual stocks.
Oh,
about 4,300 ETFs, 4,200 individuals, publicly traded individual stocks, which is crazy, right? Because I mean, you think of investing and you think, all right, yeah, you're going to go buy an individual company, and then someone creates a product like an ETF, right, to help like bundle those together, just make it convenient. Now all of a sudden we've got more bundles than we do, individual stocks. And so anyway, thought that was interesting.
That surprise you, Rex?
It does surprise me a little bit. And so when you start getting that many people competing for the same 4,200 stocks, it's interesting. And how many of those 4,300 are truly unique strategies versus just replicas of each other? Because there's, I don't know how many dozens S&P 500 ETFs that are out there. Yep. And so there's a lot of those, and those all own the same 500 stocks. And yet my guess is that it'd be interesting to know how many of those 4,300 are outperforming their benchmarks. Would also be interesting to know, because my guess is not a lot of them. Whatever the benchmark is, and it's immaterial what it is, for the discussion. But that does kind of surprise me. How about you guys from Hartford? Does that surprise you a little bit?
Yeah, I would chime in. I believe, understanding the numbers here, that's here in the United States, and it's interesting just to. I'm sure we're listening more and more. There's just a lot more of whether it's companies going public or going the other way, public going private. And so it is, our folks have talked a lot about, they've termed it as melting ice cubes. So I don't have the data right here in front of me, but probably turn the clock back a decade. We probably had 6,000 to 7,000, and here we are, this melting ice cube. Less and less publicly traded individual companies, more and more are becoming private, where outside of the United States, I believe it's about a 10x. I think the investable stocks you could buy outside the United States is in that 40,000 range internationally. And again, we've been in this U.S. dominated market for so long. It's just interesting to see, Rex mentioned earlier about concentration, or just having all of our eggs in this one basket in the United States. And it's been a great place to invest. We live in an amazing country with an amazing economy, but this is a unique year where outside the United States is actually doing a lot better than in the United States. And so this idea of, in the United States, we're able to pick from 4,000 publicly traded individual companies or stocks, where we can go outside and have up to 40,000 companies internationally, small, mid, large, growth value blend across the board that way. So again, the idea just around diversification, I'd say hasn't worked as well the last couple of years, but we're seeing maybe things start to change up a bit, and international is actually having a phenomenal year.
And when I hear about the number of ETFs, I just think there's a warning in there somewhere, right? The paradox of choice. You can now find an ETF of any flavor that you like, but back to Rex's comment about diversification, sometimes these things are so narrow. We think we have the best idea in the world, and if you're concentrating your investment in there and it doesn't work, it's not a very good feeling. So again, sometimes we're our own worst enemy when it comes to creating things of every different stripe, flavor, and color.
Yeah, I think also sometimes you can be a victim of ego, right? Sometimes people are creating ETFs just because they want to create an ETF with their name on it. Right. And so, but I think to Matt's point, I think we definitely have seen a shift this year, and who knows how long these cycles last or don't last, but it's been a long time since we've had a shift to where international holdings in general have taken a strong lead, broad lead, in overall global investment performance. Now, I think I've seen, in the investment world, this will, show how big of a geek and a nerd I am here just a little bit, but, they always have these, what we call quilt charts, right? To where, they'll map out different countries and who's done the best and who's done the worst and, year by year. And rarely, if ever, is the U.S. the number one performer globally in the investment world. There's almost always some other country that's outperformed the U.S. market. Now, none of us can tell you what that's going to be next year. None of us can predict that future. But it does show the globalization of the overall market and how that does continue, regardless of what's happening politically. That is a cat out of the bag that you're not going to be able to get back into it. It is a global market. So
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew there was a global market, but I didn't know that the U.S. wasn't one every year. It jumps around. I
the
guess.
best performer.
Yeah, but I'm assuming in the top 10 normally.
Yeah, normally they're in the top tier.
Yeah.
Right, but when you look at it, it's interesting because most of those quilt charts will kind of list the top 10 or top 15 or something like that, and normally the U.S. is kind of in the middle.
Yeah,
and so. You've seen those, I'm sure, Matt.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, if you were to look at snapshot of today, right now, I mean, emerging market, and who would have thought the noise is tariffs, the noise is deglobalization. I mean, all the noise, and here, you look at an emerging market fund, and it's up 40% year to date. Wow. S&P's up 20, a doubling, and like no one saw that.
Right. No one's predicting that.
You're right. But again, it's just to play to the idea. And again, things could adapt and change. And then you have more of the, not just emerging market, but an international strategies up, but in that 30 range. And so it's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah. Interesting number though. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah. John, on these family money talks, I want a PDF. I want a guide. I want a step-by-step, like, how do I do this?
Yeah, we have that obviously through Rex and Brandyn. We can get those materials to them because we've developed this, as I said, with the help of a wealth psychologist named Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. She specializes in kind of working with families through wealth issues, and so she helped us put together some of these suggestions. But like those 3 little exercises that I just worked with you through, sometimes the best way to start a family money talk is just to think of a story or to think of an example. Look, we are coming together with families over the next couple of months, right? It might be a story about something you were taught, you learned, you observed in your family, right? Just in the context of a normal conversation, but then being able to say to that next generation, hey, I'd also like to know how you feel about it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, hey, let's get together in a third-party location, right? We're going to call it. No, what we're going to do is share some stories, but it's important to say why, right? I think it's really important to me to share with you kind of how we've thought about money because, look, you're coming to an age now where you're going to be running into the same kind of things that we did. And I'd hate to see you not be able to learn from some of the lessons, some of the mistakes, some of the examples of what, but I'm very interested in understanding what your viewpoint is too. So keep in mind, the point of sharing these stories and to get more involved in these conversations is not necessarily to agree, but to understand, right? And that's really key.
It might be really fun to listen to one of those conversations when mom and dad don't align.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which is often.
I like that you call that fun. Right?
I've heard it other adjectives, but we'll go with fun.
It's a good time. Yeah. Those are sitcoms, I think, sometimes.
They might be.
Yeah. John, what's your feedback as far as, because I'm thinking of a scenario of like, how can I apply this to my child? I'm using Matt's example of time. Love is spelled with Time, and I'm like, okay, well, if I approach my child and ask him what he likes to spend a lot of time playing video games, and so like it's like, hey, you know how much these video games cost or whatever, like, and kind of diving into it that way. But then I was thinking, well, are one-on-one conversations okay for this type of a thing, or should we have the whole family, everybody in the same room at the same time? Like, what's the best method?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that I actually asked Kathleen Burns-Kingsbury, and she said it depends on the situation, right? So I think there is a place for, I'm a big believer in having one-on-one conversations, right? If we have, multiple members of the family, because your children, your grandchildren, they're different people, right? But there are some ground rules here, like no secrets out of school. Like, I'm not going to tell Rex one thing and then turn around and tell Brandyn something else. Well, the way Rex thinks, I don't agree with, but that's going to be a recipe for disaster. Again, it's to understand their different perspectives. And then what I would recommend, look, whether you sit as a family first and then hold individual conversations, or you hold individual conversations first, and then at some point get back together as a family to say, look, we talked about some of these things with y'all, but we wanted to get y'all together to talk about kind of, now we get into how, like you, Brandyn, you mentioned the transparency in your family. We get together, for example, if a family uses a donor advised fund, right, to support charities that they believe in, they usually name the kids as successor trustees. Do the kids know, or successor donor advisors? Do the kids know what that's about or how it works, or, that they have the freedom to pick their own, sources of giving, whether it's people who are involved in faith communities, right? They may think tithing and supporting their church is really important, but their kids may or may not be on that same page. It's okay, right? We just need to understand. And I think it's really important to kind of approach it that way.
It's so important to have those discussions with your kids, because I've seen some families to where giving has been extremely important to the parents, and yet they'll give, and they may have a building named after them at a university or something like that, right? And so major gifts, and yet the kids completely begrudge that. They're like, "Wow, I really could have used that money." Because I've had to struggle, and here I am, feeling like I'm living check to check, and dad and mom are giving all this other money to other people, and I'm here, hear me, see me. And so I think it's really important that if you're not transparent, again, they're watching, they're seeing what you're doing. And although time is love, right? A lot of kids correlate money to love because they don't have those discussions or haven't had that perspective shared with them. And so they're seeing this money go away from them. Mom and dad don't love me, right? And they're correlating that because those conversations aren't happening.
John mentioned the term, it just caught my ear and attention. He said a recipe for disaster. Some of the choices and decisions we'll make. And I just thinking, I'm the youngest of four, and my mom's mid-80s. My dad passed away a couple of years ago, and Thanksgiving and Christmas are approaching, and my mom has a couple of family recipes that I want to make sure I know how to make and can. Like, we just know when we go to Grandma Montague's, like, there's going to be her raspberry jam, and now she makes us raspberry jam, and our children will not eat any other jam. We buy it at the store. They're not touching it because it's not Grandma Montague's raspberry jam that tastes amazing. And then she makes these beignets, these scones. There's just a couple of these recipes that I just grew up with my entire life, and now our children love these recipes. And this idea of having the conversation, or how can we bring this up, just to say, hey, the holidays are coming, we're the grandma's favorites food recipes, let's bring together some money recipes, and let's just share, again, not a list of 20 things, but here's 2 things of that Grandma Montague's money recipe, and we're gonna have maybe have grandma share a couple of things, and then Mom, we're gonna have your favorite food recipes. We're gonna hear your 2 ingredients to success with money and wealth, and then to hear where it's not a preach session, but then to have the children chime in and say, you're 12 years old, or what have you learned so far? What are your feelings? What would you put on your recipe card at your age of or this time of life? So just kind of love that idea of a way to bring up the conversation in a fun, creative way. We have these recipes, and not only around food, but around money.
That's fantastic.
Oh, I love that, and I love scones.
Beignets,
Jam, beignets.
raspberry. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so John, help us land the plane here. Finish out the how to begin the money talk, and then some maybe final thoughts on what we should be or how we should be handling this.
Okay, so the first step I think you can take is understanding your money story, right? It's impossible to have a family money talk if we don't even know what our own story is. So think of but believe me, your relationship with money is probably the longest relationship you'll ever experience. It began before you were born, as your parents tried to think about how they were going to provide for you. It'll be here long after you live. If we think about the different chapters of our money story, there are things like, what have I learned about spending? What have I learned about saving, investing, giving, right? These major categories. And oftentimes we don't take the time to pause and reflect. Why do we do the things that we do? Oftentimes it's because of the experiences that we've had, the influence of others, the biases that we've collected over time. So step one is to kind of walk through some of the things we've talked about today for yourself. Or if you're a member of a couple, talk with your spouse or significant other about those. Find those areas of disagreement that we kind of laughed about. But maybe the first step is understanding disagreements between spouses or significant others. But you can't have a family money talk before you understand your own money story. So that's what I would say. Take some of those examples we talked about today and give them some thought. Jot down a couple of notes and reflect on them.
Rex?
I think that's a great starting point, right? It's hard to pass on knowledge if you don't understand yourself.
Right.
I love Rex's vulnerability that he shared as far as I think we want to, and as far as in the investment world, we always like to tout performance. And I picked this stock, this mutual fund, and it's up, this percent. And okay, that's phenomenal. That's great. But I think as far as respect, to be able to share the mistakes and the shortcomings, and hearing John and Rex both mention it, I look back before getting into this industry. I was in the nonprofit world and loved what we were doing at the time, and it was the whole 2006, 2007, the real estate, like just who needs to invest in the stock market, just buy another home and they always go up. And so being naive, went in, my wife and I, a friend, we were in the California area, had some equity in the little townhome that we had there. And sight unseen, because we were caught up in the noise, bought a home in Arizona, again, sight unseen, with a friend. And then the GFC, the global financial crisis, hits, and that thing just dropped, fell off the face of the earth. And hold on, like what? Like I've been taught and told this only goes one direction. Real estate just goes up. And again, we know longer term how things played out. But that was, again, to be able to share that mistake and how painful that was. I mean, I look at her, coming up on 25 years of marriage. There's really only one, I'd say, topic or subject where the disagreed, or the emotions just came up, and it was, if you brought up that Arizona home, like look out.
That's how we're going to poke the bear.
That's exactly.
Let's leave that till after the holidays, man.
So, but again, I think we haven't shared that story with the children, but we need to. Like mom and dad it was a significant chunk of money to buy this home in Arizona, and to share that with them. And look, we're going to make mistakes, but let's learn from that and let's be diversified. It's great to have some real estate. It's great to be in the market. It's great to go down the list of things, but love where Rex, your stock example, and where we learn.
So many lessons that you can pull out of that, though, right? And whether it's we did this because of these thoughts that we had that in hindsight may have been flawed, and this is the result, and this is the decisions we made after the crisis, and this was either good decisions or bad decisions, right? But so many examples that you can use. And so, so the more transparent we can be with our kids, I absolutely agree. The better off the family's going to be as a whole in making good, strong financial decisions and emotional and family decisions as well throughout our lives.
Love it. Thanks for joining us. That was good stuff. John, do you have anything else you want to wrap up with?
No, I think, again, I would just encourage you, take the step, give it a try, right? Yeah. And remember this concept that a wealth transfer without a wisdom transfer is probably not going to be a lasting legacy, right? So when we can add the two together, get the wealth plus the wisdom, now we have a shot at more of a congruent approach to managing family wealth over time.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be hard. It can be fun. You can pair it with the recipe.
Yeah,
Like,
that's right.
like this is great advice. Great episode. Thanks so much, you guys. Appreciate it. This has been a podcast produced by the Brandyn Collective, recorded here in our camp trailer inside the Monarch building on the Nine Rails Arts District, inside the Nine Rails Arts District. And if you found value in this podcast, you can consider supporting us at buymeacoffee.com/Banyan Media. You can watch and subscribe to us on YouTube at Through the Pines. You can like our Facebook page at Pines Podcast and follow our Instagram at Pines_podcast. This has been Through the Pines, reminding you to use yesterday's dollars to finance tomorrow's dreams.